So we are up and running. If anybody was hanging out waiting for us to start our dialogue here, I apologize. We kind of got a little bit of a late start, but nonetheless, it is an astonishingly beautiful day in Chicago. The last 4 days have been bright, sunny, and delirious because the Cubs are now the champions of the world. So too bad that we don't have Freddie Mercury and Queen in the background here to champion their cause, but I suppose we can do it via an MP3 file. So how are you this morning, Stephen?
I'm doing really well. Feeling pretty good. How are you?
Really good. Yeah, it is interesting how the world just keeps rolling on along, and it just becomes more and more bizarre to those of us who are actually beginning to awaken and look around us and observe all this, because the more absurd it becomes, the easier it is to realize that this is not reality.
Yeah, that really reminds me of that, I think it's the John Lennon quote that he said that the more real you get, the more unreal the world gets.
That's an absolute fact, yes. So
yeah, and I really feel like he's talking about our state of awareness there. You know, he's saying that the more aware you become of truth and of reality, the more you see how unreal this physicality is.
Exactly, and how all of these people are engaged in self-centered or self-serving enterprises, and yet if they would stop and look at what they're actually doing, they're shooting themselves in the foot in a huge way. So we're seeing more and more of that erupt here. I don't know if anybody noticed, but there was another earthquake in Oklahoma yesterday or last night that hit 5 on the Richter scale. Now, these are earthquakes that are completely unheard of 10 years ago, and, you know, for the last 20,000 years, as far as I know, in that region. But they started fracking there, and all of a sudden the earth is starting to wobble, and that feeds into the illusion even more and more. So then everybody is taking a stand and getting their feathers ruffled and actually trying to oppose or support something that biological standards would not be a good thing for us to continue to dabble with. So it is kind of fun watching the whole drama play out.
Yeah, it totally can be fun when we maintain that perspective of who we really are while it's happening, right?
Right. As long as we are identifying ourselves as spirit, then, you know, it doesn't matter what happens in this physical realm, because we are not bound by the laws of physicality. But as soon as we do a little backsliding and identify with being a body, then we do stir up a little bit of brack in the water that surrounds us, I guess you could say.
And that's when we need to call in some light, which starts off our first lesson here on lesson 92. Do you want me to start it off, or do you want to start it off, Chris?
Well, I suppose I can start moving along here. If you remember, our previous lesson was all about how miracles are seen in light. And so this lesson, it says the idea for today is an extension of the previous one. You do not think of light in terms of strength and darkness in terms of weakness. That is because your idea of what seeing means is tied up with the body and its eyes and brain. Thus, you believe that you can change what you see by putting little bits of glass before your eyes. This is among the many magical beliefs that come from the conviction that you are a body and the body's eyes can see. So that really is kind of tying into that whole set of circumstances around the idea of the illusions that surround us and how we are in fact seduced by those illusions and end up losing our mind over a belief that Hillary or Trump or somebody else is going to save us. And the truth is, you know, when we sink down to that level, we're pulling the veil across our spiritual eyes, our capacity to experience vision. And so we want to step back out of that and let the light come in.
Oh yeah, that's exactly right. And it seems also that there's a lot of mythology and ideas about the ego being the trickster. And that's sort of what illusions tend to do. They trick us into believing you are something else other than what you are. And I think that that's the best defense the ego really has against the truth is get you to identify with it instead of who you really are.
That is true. As we go a little bit further along here, it says, you also believe the body's brain can think. And this is one of my first big ahas with the Course in Miracles. And actually I went back before I even was introduced to the Course, because separating that whole thought process and recognizing that the brain is a piece of meat and that the mind is infinite in its capacity and much more complex than a piece of meat could ever possibly be, is a big step in gaining a little bit of ascendance over the idea that we are physical, that we have physical needs, and that our physical needs are something we have to fight for. Because as Jesus told us, you know, just relax. The needs that you have to be maintained in this world will be supplied to you if you will stop trying to control things, if you will surrender to living in spirit. So a little bit further down it says, it is God's strength in you that is the light in which you see, as it is his mind with which you think. His strength denies your weakness. So it's very encompassing, it's very systemic.
Yeah, and I love how the description of God's traits are negating of the ego self. They don't allow that to even have credibility to exist. Like in God's state of awareness, we we're not even aware of all the suffering that happens here. Wouldn't you agree, Chris?
Oh yes. Yeah. In order for God to actually enter into the dream would mean that God was vulnerable. And so that's why we have that assurance of God's constant support of us. God created us as life, but God isn't going to play on the playing field that we're here on. That's why the Holy Spirit was brought into being.
Yeah, exactly. To bridge that gap.
Absolutely.
Lesson 93 says that light and joy and peace abide in me. You think you are the home of evil, darkness, and sin. You think if anyone could see the truth about you, he would be repelled, recoiling from you as if from a poisonous snake. You think if what is true about you were revealed to you, you would be struck with horror so intense that you would rush to death by your own hand, living on after seeing this being impossible. These are beliefs so firmly fixed that it is difficult to help you see that they are based on nothing. That you have made mistakes is obvious. That you have sought salvation in strange ways, have been deceived, deceiving and afraid of foolish fantasies and savage dreams, and have bowed down to idols made of dust. All this is true by what you now believe. And then it says, today we question this. That's really like one of those times where Jesus really like gives us a clear, straight shot of exactly what the ego mind entails, what believing in the ego entails, and like how insane it is, really, from that perspective of sanity.
Well, and more importantly, how self-negating it is, because if we listen to the dialogue that our ego has generated about who we are, every time you did the tiniest thing in the material realm, that was a strike against you. So we all carry the burden of, 10 billion things that we supposedly have done, even in the most insignificant way, just slapping the mosquito on your arm. You killed something, so therefore you should be punished. And it just, it compounds, goes on and on and on. So again, we're being urged to recognize the truth of our identity. And once we're able to start to identify with the Christ consciousness, with Jesus as, we remember him from the stories of his passage through this realm, the more that we are able to relax into a space of self-acceptance and allow ourselves to view who it is that we are, formed in the image and likeness of God, rather than formed in dust and mud and sweat and tears and blood and toil.
Yeah, that's a really vivid imagery there to give us a clear picture of what the ego identifies with.
And with this section, we're given an affirmation that I think is really, really powerful. You scroll down a little bit to the 8th paragraph. It says, light and joy and peace abide in me. My sinlessness is guaranteed by God. And then we're told, put away your foolish self-images and spend the rest of the practice period in trying to experience what God has given you in place of what you have decreed for yourself. And of course, the only way out of this whole journey is to remove yourself from judgment. As you judge others, that's a reflection of how you're judging yourself. So as soon as you can stop having those opinions and beliefs about others, the more rapidly you will step into the truth of who you actually are.
Yeah, and it really feels like in that line of my sinlessness is guaranteed by God, but that's like a stamp that God's left on us, and it's a permanent stamp that won't ever go away, that will always be sinless in his knowledge of us. Right,
and sinless in reality. I mean, again, you walk into a kid's room at night, and you see them struggling, and they're involved in a dream that probably is kind of ghastly, and you have no idea what the dream is. You simply know that your child is suffering, and so you try in whatever way you can to gently awaken the child, but you certainly wouldn't accuse them of being sinful for having a dream. And that's the same process that is going on in our own awakening, both individually as well as collectively.
Healing that mind split.
Yes. Moving down to lesson 94, I am as God created me. And this is a reiteration. This goes back to the beginning of our lessons when we examined this idea, and we continue to reinforce it. So the only way that the mind is going to be turned around is by erosion. And so this theme shows up, this specific statement shows up over and over and over again throughout the course, because we are taking a boulder and reducing it to a pebble. And it is a lengthy process. It is a somewhat tedious process, but it is the only way out. And that's what gives it value to us. We have to constantly re-embrace that idea that I am as God created me.
Yeah, and just go ahead and get off this first paragraph here. It says, today we continue with the one idea which brings complete salvation, the one statement which makes all forms of temptation powerless, the one thought which renders the ego silent and entirely undone. You are as God created you. The sounds of this world are still, the sights of this world disappear, and all the thoughts that this world ever held are wiped away forever by this one idea. Here is salvation accomplished. Here is sanity restored.
And that is, again, connected to the idea that the more we try to think independently on our own, the more we get ourselves into trouble around this. So this idea is shared with us by divinity, by higher consciousness. And as we apply it, we extend it so that collectively everybody is drawn to a higher plateau. So even when you're doing your work, the ego is going to have its criticisms. It is going to say, oh, you know, why are we doing this? This really doesn't have any effect. Right now they're killing whales and fracking and doing all these hideous things, and we need to get out there on the front line. But the truth is that there are unseen processes and forces that are extending our self-acceptance out into the world around us. And as we accept ourselves as the Christ, it does have an influence on every other living, not just person, but being. As we're told throughout the course, that redemption isn't just exclusive to humans, but it is inclusive of the animals, the plants, everything that we imagine to be alive.
Really, we could include every atom in existence then, if that's the case.
Absolutely,
and
yes.
I really appreciate this last part at the end of this lesson that says, tell yourself frequently that today that you are as God created you, and be sure to respond to anyone who seems to irritate you with these words. You are as God created you. You are his son eternally. And I feel that is a really powerful lesson, because it's not only you, it's not only you're affirming it to yourself, you're affirming it to all your brothers and sisters, you're affirming it to all living beings. So every single person, no matter how they might feel like they're irritating us, then we just remind ourselves of what they truly are. And so we forgive them, and we forgive ourselves for projecting onto them.
Exactly. It makes the day much more effortless when we immediately fall back to that forgiveness and to that recognition that you're dealing with the Christ every time you have an encounter with another person. So that makes it much more manageable for us to advance without a sense of guilt, without creating more of the negativity that does cause us to feel weighted down, to cause us to not be able to fly and soar with our spiritual truth.
Yeah, well said. Here we go to lesson 95, which says, I am one self, united with my creator. Today's idea accurately describes you as God created you. You are one with yourself and one with him. Yours is the unity of all creation. Your perfect unity makes change in you impossible. You do not accept this, and you fail to realize it must be so, only because you believe that you have changed yourself already. You see yourself as a ridiculous parody on God's creation, weak, vicious, ugly, and sinful, miserable, and beset with pain. Do you want to speak to that part, Chris?
Yeah, I think that's especially salient to a large part of both the Christian as well as the Jewish and the Muslim communities, because when we go back and look at the creation stories, in the book of Genesis, we have the story of the mud man, how God took a handful of dust and mixed water with it and turned it into a human being, and that's what we identify ourselves with. And of course that storyline goes on throughout the Old Testament with multiple tragedies associated with that identity that we all carry, that presence of Adam that exists in our collective subconscious. So that is a hideous parody. I mean, God wouldn't, number one, wouldn't create something that vulnerable. I mean, look at germs, and things that are invisible can cause us to be eclipsed and remove life from us. That would not be a godly creation. So it just makes everything, very clear by comparing the collective beliefs and our mythology with the enlightened new interpretation of identity and of creation itself.
Yeah, and also it's I love that it says, yours is the unity of all creation, and your perfect unity makes changes in you impossible. When we can start to become aware of the way God created us and who we really are, then we start to realize that we're always with God, that we never actually separate from God, and that we're also one with all creation.
Yes. As we go down here, I am one self united with my Creator, at one with every aspect of creation, and limitless in power and in peace. And everybody who has that experience of enlightenment, who experiences that shift, will dialogue about this amazing plateau that they arrived at, where they felt like they were totally unified with all life throughout the cosmos. Back in the 60s and 70s, when acid was a very popular drug, although I think it's probably equally popular now. But a lot of times people would have that experience of breaking free from the ego, and they wouldn't have any real clear way of describing what was going on. They didn't recognize it as a spiritual experience, but they did recognize it as the experience of unification, of the ultimate unity of the personal self with the infinite self. And so, again, part of these lessons really fall into that category of being things that you can go back and pick out through literature, through spoken word, whatever, and see how we have accidentally fallen into this state of awareness in the past. And the Course now gives us a way to access that state of illumination by desire or by will. So it's not as chaotic entering into that state of awakened self.
Yeah, this very clear instruction manual for training our mind back to that infinite state of awareness.
It absolutely is. Go ahead.
I was going to go ahead and read off the last part of this lesson, which says To everyone you meet today, be sure to give the promise of today's idea and tell them this. You are one self with me, united with our Creator in this self. I honor you because of what I am and what He is, who loves us both as one.
Yes, the salient point here is love being the binding element.
So we're on to 96.
Yes. And this is going to eradicate that escape clause where you can blame things on somebody else. Lesson 96, salvation comes from my one self. Although you are one self, you experience yourself as two, as both good and evil, loving and hating, mind and body. This sense of being split into opposites induces feelings of acute and constant conflict and leads to frantic attempts to reconcile the contradictory aspects of this self-perception. You have sought many such solutions, and none of them has worked. The opposite you see in you will never be compatible, but one exists. The fact that truth and illusion cannot be reconciled, no matter how you try, what means you use and where you see the problem must be accepted if you would be saved. So this pushes us to that threshold of realization that every time we find an avenue out of taking responsibility for our thoughts, our beliefs, our ideas, it becomes a blockage for us to actually get to know ourselves as we truly exist. So basically, this is telling us that the person you think you are, you're going to have to step away from that. And at first, it may be in little tiny milliseconds, but eventually, the idea that we're approaching here is that Chris is going to have to dissolve. Stephen is going to have to dissolve. All these different little egos that are never fully realized. I mean, we all feel inadequate. We all feel deficits. And that's because we created a false identity. And at some point, it will have to be surrendered.
I'm going to go ahead and read this fourth paragraph of this lesson too. It says, a mind and body cannot both exist. Make no attempt to reconcile the two, for one denies the other can be real. If you are physical, your mind is gone from your self-concept, for it has no place in which you could be really part of you. If you are spirit, then the body must be meaningless to your reality. It says spirit makes use of mind as means to find its self-expression. And the mind which serves spirit is at peace and filled with joy. So it's a nice reminder.
And it is, you know, it is seductive being physical, being in our body, because we have all of these little glittering things that that we get addicted to, you know, and that is the thing that Jesus talks about in the Course on multiple occasions, about looking at life as a picture frame. And when you have this gaudy frame with all of these seductive, amazing little baubles attached to it, it causes you to be diverted from looking at the image that it contains. And that's the way the body works, is that you don't want to, or you don't have to address the fact that at some point it's flesh rotting on bone, and eventually it's going to be consumed by bugs, and it gets pretty ugly from there on in. So we get distracted by all of our adventures on the physical level, and that is the seduction that causes us to repeat the whole journey over and over and over again.
Yeah. And it really, in this lesson, really seems to be calling us to gain some perspective of what we really are. And I mean, we're extensions of love, extensions of spirit. So the body does not hold validity for our reality.
Right. And repeatedly, Jesus gives us a good prescription for this. Using the body in a sacred way, that. And then he tells us that at the end of our earthly journey, we can lay the body down lovingly, and it won't have been so corrupted and so distorted, because we are aspiring to use it in a constructive way to help, everybody else around us climb out of the nightmare. So we don't vilify the body, we don't attack the body, we don't give the body any power, but we recognize that by turning its use over to the Holy Spirit, it is a useful thing, and we can use it in a sacred manner.
Yeah, absolutely. And so we're moving on to lesson 97.
Yes. And this is another, basically the entire lesson is one huge affirmation, and it's very simple. It says, I am spirit. Today's idea identifies you with your one self. It accepts no split identity, nor tries to weave opposing factors into unity. It simply states the truth. Practice this truth today as often as you can, for it will bring your mind from conflict to the quiet fields of peace. No chill of fear can enter, for your mind has been absolved from madness, letting go illusions of a split identity. And boy, this is really on point for these current events going on around us. With the election, we have all of these people who imagine that they can be harmed and that they've got to have somebody that's going to represent their interests. And it all is reduced down to taking care of the body worship issue. So as soon as you start looking at it from the level of being spirit, then all of a sudden it doesn't matter who wins the election. It doesn't matter what goes on with all of the different causes, all of the different events going on globally here that cause us to panic and be fearful or to be empathetic because we're seeing tragedy all around us. It lifts us to the point where we can begin to separate ourselves from the physical world and to recognize the physical world is simply a video that we're watching on YouTube and imagining that it's real and that we're right there in the middle of it.
Yeah, I don't remember if we've talked about this before, but identifying with spirit oftentimes comes with having this more of an observer perspective, wouldn't you say, Chris? Like having more of an observer, a neutral perspective, or a watcher kind of awareness towards everything happening in this world.
Yes, as soon as you are able to disconnect and view the events and circumstances without being invested, without being driven to either yay or nay in the adventure, becoming disconnected from the physical realm. And like you said, being the observer is the most empowering state that you can attain, because then you remove yourself from victimhood, and you also collectively remove all of humanity from victim status. So it is important that we are mindful of this, and no matter what our enterprise, no matter what we're called to do, to keep that as a primary focus as we move through our day, is to be the observer and don't allow yourself, though, to become descendant into the adventure going on around you.
Yeah, absolutely. And in this lesson, that also says here towards the end, the Spirit am I, a holy Son of God, free of all limits, safe and healed and whole, free to forgive and free to save the world. I remember saying that to myself when I first did this lesson, saying that to myself pretty much every day, or every moment of the day. And it's really profound.
Yeah, once you get into it, it becomes very compelling. You know, once you start really putting your attention on these lessons, they lift you up and you start seeing the immediate rewards. And then it does become something where it's very easy to slide into that mindset, especially, you know, when you're out in the grocery store and somebody bangs into your car and, you know, all the different craziness that we encounter throughout the day. If we slide back into your course affirmations, it makes the day a lot more enjoyable, actually. You can look at it without any kind of reactionary stance, and from a place of detachment, just say, well, another event. We'll see where this takes us.
Yeah, absolutely. And as we move on to our final lesson for today, lesson 98 says, I will accept my part in God's plan for salvation. Today is a day of special dedication. We take a stand on but one side today. We side with truth and let illusions go. We will not vacillate between the two, but take a firm position with the one. We dedicate ourselves to truth today and to salvation as God planned it be. We will not argue it as something else. We will not seek for it where it is not. In gladness, we accept it as it is and take the part assigned to us by God. How happy to be certain is the start of the next paragraph.
Yes. And
so that's interesting that he offers the affirmation of not seeking for it where it is not, like, because that is something that we do, and as when we listen to the ego temptation,
we most assuredly do. And the master plan that the Holy Spirit is trying to enact is quite interesting, because from what I observe, there are times when we're picking up on the intention of the divine to do things or to go places or to meet people, and that's when we're actually participating in God's plan. Then there are other times when we're off on our own little crusades and out there creating an adventure or a drama or a situation. And yet, even those periods when we're failing to follow through and to trust and to act on behalf of God's plan for us, the Holy Spirit still can loop that around and turn a negative into a positive. So this again gives you that extra level of assurance that it's always a win-win, no matter whether you're working with a program or against the program. One way or the other, the outcome is guaranteed as part of the process of redemption. So the only thing that can happen is you can slow the journey down, but you can't alter the outcome of the experience of life.
Right, and that all really God calls on us for is to be willing to accept that part that we all play in, His plan for salvation.
Exactly, and as soon as you get into a space of surrender, then you're going to be able to actually get the prompts, get the information that's going to keep you on track.
Absolutely. So that pretty much wrap things up for our review of the lessons today.
Yes, in 1 week we'll know who the president is, and we'll know whether or not we're doomed or saved, and who knows what other amazing things. I mean, for God's sake, the Cubs won. So the miraculous obviously surrounds us. There's got to be more miracles down the pipeline here.
Absolutely. And thanks for joining us here, Don, the last minute. I'm sorry we're about finished up here for today.
That's all right. Try to catch you guys.
You could watch the recorded version, though.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, and we have got adventures calling us. So, Stephen, I will chat with you in 1 week, and hopefully in 1 week's time we'll have some astonishing stories to share.
Excellent. Sounds good to me. All right. Well, stay blessed. I'll see you in a week from now. Feel free to like, share, comment, everyone who watches, and we'll see you again next week.
Yes, and let us know if you have questions or observations or insights, things you would like for us to address, because we are doing this for ourselves as well as you, but there's only one of us here.
Excellent.
See you soon.
See you soon, Chris.